I've spoken about BPA, bisphenol a lot on this channel before, and if you're a long-time viewer of mine, you've probably got bored of the amount of times that I've talked about its effects on the body, it being in plastics, etc., the endocrine disrupting properties that it has. But now I'm going to go through something different about BPA that you may not even know nor understand about, and neither did I before I did a bit of research on how BPA is actually processed inside of the body. If you are still, though, unsure of what BPA is a plasticizing agent that is used in a wide variety of plastic packagings. You know, the kind of things that your like water bottles, your sort of sunflower oils, all that sort of stuff, the milk bottles even, all that sort of stuff contains BPA. And while there has been a lot of talk about BPA being a harmful chemical in the sort of wider press and wider media, and this sort of forced companies into choosing to use BPA-free alternatives, the bisphenols as like a group of things, BPA, if you didn't know, stands for bisphenol A, the bisphenols as like a group of chemicals and toxins and substances contains a whole load of different chemicals. And even if it does say BPA-free, it will still probably contain things like BPS, BPAF, BPF, all these things that are still just as endocrine disrupting and like hard on the body as BPA is. And BPA, if you didn't know, it is an estrogenic chemical and stimulates the brain to stop the production of testosterone, because testosterone is used in the production of estrogen, and the brain thinks because of the amount of BPA in the body that there's too much estrogen, so it will stop testosterone to sort of make sure that your ratios of testosterone to estrogen are still okay, even if they're not, because like BPA is the thing that's kind of meddling with your endocrine system, and that's why it's known as an endocrine disrupting chemical. And as well as being an endocrine disrupting chemical, BPA is also something that is known as being fat soluble. Now, fat soluble means it can dissolve in fat and be transported by fat very, very, very easily, but not by water. It cannot sort of dissolve in water and be transported by water. It has to be dissolved by fats. And this means that, you know, the sort of sunflower oil packagings, the like really, really awfully like compressible plastic packagings, BPA will seep into that so easily. And while it will have a much harder time getting to plastic water bottles, it will still leach occasionally, especially if you're like putting your mouth around it and then drinking it, etc. That's still going to cause BPA to get into your body. But the whole like polyunsaturated fats, sunflower oil, sort of bottles of oil, that will contain so much BPA because of its leachy properties as a plasticizing agent. But while that is one consequence of BPA being fat soluble, another consequence is that it cannot be excreted by the body as BPA, because your urine is mostly made up of water, and when things go through your kidneys, etc., BPA simply won't be able to get transferred out of the kidneys, simply because it's going to be dissolved in a lot of fat, which is far too big to sort of pass the semi-permeable membrane. If it was in water and was dissolved in water, it would be far easier for it to actually do that and achieve that, because it would be dissolved in water and the water would get pushed out of the kidneys. Some of it would go back in, but then some of it would go through the ureter and into the bladder. BPA simply cannot do this, and so it has to be metabolized by the body into more water-soluble substances. And that's kind of what I'm going to go through for the rest of this video, how exactly BPA can be metabolized by the liver, which the liver, by the way, is often the thing that metabolizes the majority of toxic substances, as well as a few other things like fructose, galactose, and sugars, etc. The liver metabolizes the majority of toxins and things that really aren't supposed to be in the body to get excreted and become water soluble. Now, there aren't actually really many steps to this metabolic process like the other metabolic processes that I talked about in previous videos. There's only one reaction. Well, there's two reactions, but they're sort of the same level of reaction in a way, and that is BPA plus glucuronic acid turning into BPA gluconoride using the enzyme. And the enzymes are often things that catalyze reactions, by the way, if you didn't know that. Enzyme cytochrome PHSO. That means the BPA gluconoride, it's more water soluble than BPA, and this means that it can be dissolved in water, not as easily as something that's like salt or something, but it still can be dissolved, and this means that it will end up being able to transfer through the sort of kidneys, go into the bladder, and then be excreted by the body. But there are a load of other forms of like water-soluble BPA. For instance, another sort of reaction on this sort of step 1 level is BPA plus sulfate ends up turning into BPA sulfate using the same enzyme, cytochrome PHSO. These two molecules are the most water-soluble forms of like BPA metabolites, and they get excreted by the body. And while there are other metabolites of BPA, they're not really as water-soluble and will still stay in the body for an extended period of time. This means that BPA is known as something called a cumulative poison, and it will just sort of stay and circulate around the bloodstream, have its reproductive effects, have its sort of generational fertility effects, and then maybe after a while it will all end up going out of the body. But because of the sort of amount of plastics in our environment, through things like the polyunsaturated fatty oil casings, through our plastic water bottles, through the sort of milk bottle packaging, it ends up being constantly sort of renewed into the bloodstream, and have to sort of, the process kind of repeats, but then it's renewed again the next day, and it's like a never-ending process. But the main problem with BPA is that it's a generational disease. It's not really disease, but BPA is like a generational chemical that will affect the fertility and the sort of hormonal balance of generations to come. BPA can pass through the placental barrier and into fetuses, and this means that it will circulate around the sort of newly formed fetus's bloodstream. It will go around its sort of reproductive system where it's like little capillaries, arteries, and veins are, and it will do things that will mean that when that baby ends up being born, it will potentially just have a load of genital defects, or will just be infertile. It may have not done enough to sort of actually cause physical, visible, tangible problems, but it may still literally cause infertility because it can pass through the placenta so easily. That's one of the main problems with BPA, and it's a harsh thing because plastics are so common, so convenient, but they do end up killing not just you and your systems, but your children's systems as well. It's a horrible thing to think about. BPA does cause infertility. It's one of the actual mainstream sort of chemicals. While there are a lot of things about science that the media kind of ignore, don't really talk about all that much, and just kind of leave us sort of citizens in a way in the dark, BPA has been talked about in a lot of articles that I've seen on the internet, which shows how bad it can actually be if big conglomerates, media companies, etc. are still actually talking about it, even though not talking about it would sort of benefit them in one way or another. But that's basically it about BPA, its metabolism, its effects on the body generationally, as well as like the basics of it just being a general endocrine disruptor chemical and where it can be found. So with that, I hope you found value in this video, and I also highly recommend subscribing because I love this community of young tribal people who are willing to improve themselves so much more than they already have, and good luck.